Hello, and welcome to Running the Table, the podcast where we run through everything on the table in the world of sports. And in the world of college sports, a bombshell has dropped as there is some more conference realignment. USC and UCLA are departing the Pac-12 to leave for the Big Ten as soon as 2024. It was made official and they were accepted into the conference. And Tim, I know you have a lot of opinions. I have a lot of opinions as well. And just about this situation in general and the domino effect it causes across college sports. So, Tim, are you ready to get into it?
It's an interesting one to think about, but let's run it. We've got a lot to talk about here, a lot to unwrap.
Oh, yes, we do. And I think the main point that we have to start with when talking about USC and UCLA to the Big Ten is that it really creates more questions than it answers. But first, when we look into those questions, let's try to look at why in the world a move like this would even happen. Well, first of all, football is your big answer.
That's your main answer. It doesn't dig football much deeper than that. And money. Yeah, it's money.
Yeah, because when you look at football, the Big Ten is the premier conference that is not the SEC. And considering that the SEC is now forming a super conference with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma, the Big Ten needs to try to compete. So why not snag the two biggest brands on the West Coast and
plenty of reasons why
and absolve them into your conference? It only adds more money and more revenue to an already wealthy conference. And for example, the Big Ten is in the midst of negotiating a new TV deal. So this move is pretty premeditated.
That TV money, man. That TV money.
That TV deal is going to be worth north of $1 billion. And now that USC and UCLA are in the conference, they can get in on that TV money. And now the Big Ten can go, hey, we're getting names like Lincoln Riley in there for football and Mick Cronin in there for basketball. So guess what? More money, please. And then there's recruiting. You get to go to, these Midwestern towns and recruit for the Big Ten, saying that, hey, you'll have an opportunity to not only play everywhere in the Midwest, you'll get a pair of games on the West Coast potentially each year.
Just the concept of going to school out in the West Coast. I mean, you don't get that in any other school in the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. Now you can say, all right, I can go live the life of being out at USC or UCLA and play these Big Ten teams in sports. It's a big sandwich of all these different benefits, but I think there's a whole lot of negatives that we'll get into of what it means for other schools and just for sort of the scheduling issues that it brings for the conference as a whole.
That's a big one. Yeah, let's get into that, because now the fact that you have the first cross-continental conference in all of college
East
sports,
Coast to West Coast, like, oh my goodness,
from New Jersey in the Atlantic to Los Angeles in the Pacific, you truly have just all across America. And are you ready for UCLA and USC fans to wake up at 9 a.m. to watch them play Penn State at Happy Valley or Michigan State at East Lansing? And what about those kids that go to Rutgers and Maryland that have to fly all the way to USC and UCLA?
You fly like 8 hours to go play a
conference game. A conference game, Tim. Like, we're laughing about it, but that's what it's going to be as soon as 2024.
I think when this gets put into effect and gets going, I think we will start to hear some of just even when things don't necessarily go poorly, just the overall like horror stories of what some of these student athletes have to go through. And here's the thing, student athletes, all of these people are still trying to be students at the end of the day. And we talk about football and even basketball when we're sure at this big of a level, not many of them are nearly as worried about the student side of things. But this goes across all sports, despite this deal being organized for the benefit of football and for TV money. All of these sports now have to do with the aftermath.
To a tiny extent, but
basketball is a little added benefit in there, but this deal you can tell is made for football. To me, it's all about the competition you play, and you talk about a concept of USC got to face better teams if you're going to get the type of pedigree to
Yeah,
play in the
pedigree,
college football
prestige,
playoff. So it's like
exposure.
you get that that's the reason why, but then you think about all these other sports that are now with limited money, limited resource, and their travel is not nearly as luxurious. They don't have all like the time in the world like football players get and whatnot, with being able to all the accommodations that they bring. Not all sports get that. So now they have to deal with the aftermath of this as well. And that's, I think, what really bothers me the most is the travel accommodations and what that's going to do for different sports that don't get quite the leniency and sort of treatment that football does. And even you can rope basketball into that too. But I don't know. It just really bothers me. I very much am of the opinion that this is a poor decision. And I think, like you said, the domino effect this creates of, okay, we're opening the door for this to happen for more teams in some of the bigger teams in mid majors and so on and so forth, and other teams where you start losing out on the balance of conferences and even just having different conferences represented in all these different types of, whether it be like the national tournament for college basketball or college football. You talk about the like New Year's Six Bowls and the college football playoff. You're now condensing, like, okay,
Oh my God, New Year's.
it's like SEC, Big Ten.
USC could potentially represent the Big Ten in the
from,
Rose Bowl. That just makes me want to barf.
that doesn't feel right. That just doesn't feel right.
But to go back on your point of just the concept of conferences in general, where this is heading is we now have two super conferences, because the precedent that USC and UCLA's move sets, you compare that to a little under a year ago when Texas and Oklahoma announced that they were going to leave the
That's
Big 12
realistically what sort of started all of this.
Yeah, and
that was the beginning of the dominoes.
Honestly, if I'm being like, you can understand geographically Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC because they're still
they're roped in there in the general area. Yeah,
A&M in the SEC, and like that at least kind of makes some sense. And
but now with the Big Ten, you've got West Coast, Great Plains, Midwest, and East Coast all in a giant who knows what conference. Can we be called the way too Big Ten now?
The way too big. That's a good name for it. Oh my goodness. Yeah,
like once again, they're up to 16 for both of these teams now, or both these conferences now.
Yeah, and we look at the Big Ten and the SEC now. I want to kind of flip it around and talk about the little guys. When Texas and Oklahoma left for the SEC, the Big 12 had a chance to pivot and add 4 schools to at least semi-alleviate and make up for the loss of those 2 flagship programs. The Big 12 is adding Cincinnati, Houston, Central Florida, and BYU a year from now, July 1st, 2023. And like that at least makes up for it. The Pac-12 lost their 2 flagship programs, and there is no end in sight for how they're even going to potentially leave it. Like, what are they going to do?
They're just...
Yeah, this was already a suffering conference as is. And now schools like Oregon, Stanford, Washington, Colorado, Utah are going to depart for their own survival. And I mean, hey, good for the Big 12, because I've heard a lot of rumors of like Utah, Colorado, maybe Oregon jettisoning to the Big 12 just because. But where we're trending in this new era of super conferences and what that is doing to the existing guard, instead of a power 5, maybe you have a power 4 with the
looking like we're going
filling that vacuum, and
we're going to seemingly eliminate a conference altogether in terms of the main major conferences that have a big effect in these sports.
Yeah, I mean, the Pac-12 is known as the Conference of Champions, but is it really? Like, is it really now?
Who left?
When you're left with Oregon, Stanford, Cal. I mean, let's be real. And then another side of this is we're looking at football. Let's keep the lens on football. What about Notre Dame, who is still a football independent?
I never know what they're doing.
Because, well, anytime conferences get realigned and reshuffled, Notre Dame is always, you know, kind of the sore thumb that sticks out, because they have been a football independent since the beginning of time. They are the last relic of a long lost era of college football. but where football independence may not be sustainable, I mean, they already have their foot in the ACC in terms of where every other sport calls the ACC home. So
yeah, exactly.
Would Notre Dame potentially go there and the ACC add another school to then get to 16 to try to match the Big Ten and the SEC? Or would Notre Dame just try to leave entirely and try to latch on to the Big Ten? Because
geographically, that's kind of the one that makes the most sense.
Any school that gets Notre Dame is going to be getting an elite program, a big name.
They compete in a lot of different sports.
Oh, yeah. That compete in a lot of different sports.
And boy, do they bring in money.
Yes, they do. And that is the big thing. So that's why the what about Notre Dame question is even asked, because yeah, they have a deal in place.
I don't really want them in the Big Ten, but geographically it's what makes the most sense. Although, as we've shown, the Big Ten clearly doesn't care about what makes sense geographically.
Geography doesn't mean shit.
So realistically, if Notre Dame is to make a move, I think the most sensible move is just join the rest of their sports in the ACC, so you're not shaking up the rest of their sports. And it's kind of just it. Once again, you talk about the numbers making the most sense as well. Bumps them up to 16 to match Big Ten and
15,
SEC.
They need to add one more.
Oh, okay, so they'd be at 15.
Yeah,
yeah. But realistically, it wouldn't be that hard without as many
now.
teams as are looking to shuffle now. So it's yeah, they could be another step in the dominoes of all of this.
Yeah, and I've heard some reports where it's we're going to see super conferences with 20 teams each at the end of this, which that's too much.
At that point, you have to completely restructure how conference play in all these sports is made then, because even if you try to split conferences in half, then you still can't play most of these teams. At that point, you essentially have to go, if you're going to keep pushing these conferences up and up in numbers,
you're eventually going to have to divide them back up again.
You know what it's going to be? You know what it almost essentially trends into? The conferences in the NFL. You switch into the NFC and FFC, and then have little divisions of 4 or 5 teams here and there, but with the massive amount of college programs in the United States, and you'll just have to put teams in little divisions, and you're right back, except you have more conferences and they're smaller than your previous system. I only see it getting more and more extreme and worse as this goes on.
Yeah, well, essentially, what we're saying is when Texas and Oklahoma moved to the SEC, that created a ripple effect.
It opened up a can of worms that I don't know if we really wanted to get into.
Well, that one wasn't a big deal. That was the one shoe falling where it's okay, the Big 12
but it opened the door, and that's what I'm saying.
Yes,
it opened the door.
But then it opened the door for USC and UCLA to move to the Big 10, and that one is going to have the most consequence and the most future repercussions for not just college football, not just college basketball, but college athletics in general. You got anything else, Tim?
I mean, it was certainly a shock move for me when I first heard about it, and I was like, oh man, no way this happens.
Well, especially considering that you, as a Purdue student, a member of the Big Ten existing, right? You and a Purdue fan, you will see the effects of this firsthand in 2024.
I mean, yeah, you talk about the after effects that it brings on the sports and whatnot, because it's the big thing for me as a student and thinking about just the sports in general, I think, oh man, the Big Ten title race for college basketball becomes a lot more interesting.
Yes, it does.
Because all of a sudden UCLA plants themselves as a Big Ten championship favorite pretty much year in and year out. So we may get into that in the future, but that's one of the first things that crossed my mind coming from a program where Purdue leads the conference and Big Ten championships. It's okay, you just made it a whole heck of a lot more difficult.
And I immediately thought about it from a football perspective. It's oh boy, you're getting Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams, and this
now how much harder is it going to be to get any traditional Big Ten program out of the general conference play to represent them at some of the highest levels when you bring
now you get to revive those rivalries of USC Michigan, USC Ohio State, but
UCLA and Purdue used to have a little bit of history way back in the day with the whole John Wooden stuff
helps,
and whatnot,
yeah, Tim, I'm generally with you that I think this is going to do more harm than good, and I
don't really like it. Yeah,
it is opened up more questions. then it is answered. So that,
and we'll see how it transpires as this summer goes on and through these next couple of years, when these moves actually start to happen. By the time we reach 2024, 2025, how is this actually going to look like an application rather than just concept? Because there's going to be a whole lot of questions that need to get answered, and I really am curious to see what answers they're going to put out on the table, and what the not only public but responses from the athletes themselves and from the universities of, okay, what kind of special hell does this open up for them for the most case? So it remains to be seen. Obviously, this is just the beginning, but we're in for quite a ride of what this can turn into.
Oh, it's going to be a lot of fun, whether it be good or bad. We're going to have 2 more years of college sports normalcy before we essentially enter the
Everything
upside
gets
down.
spun on its head.
Yeah. But that's all we got for this episode of Running the Table. This is a little bit broader, as it's not only covering college football or college basketball, but it's just college sports. And we'll see what effects this has. But if you like what we do here, go watch more of our stuff. We have a lot of stuff for you in the past, and we're going to be doing a lot of stuff for you in the future.
And a lot of stuff cooking for the future.
Oh, yes, sir. But until next time, like and subscribe for more Running the Table content, and we out. Like it, but not a lot. I don't like it.